Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. This is the last of our Journeying Together large group discussion discussions, and it's been quite a journey since September. We have some guests with us tonight from Westminster Presbyterian Church from the DC area, I believe. And so it's late there, so thank you for taking the time to be with us. Before we get started, because we do have some new folks, I just want to kind of remind you of some ground rules. Keep your video on if you're able. And this is a confidential discussion, so please respect the conversations that happen in this space. In the small group, during the small group times, please share from your own experience. Try to use I statements rather than you or other people. There's no blame, shame, or judgment. Honor the experiences that are shared in the space. You can also feel free not to share. You can just listen. And lastly, allow for the Holy Spirit to work. Make room to be uncomfortable, to be challenged, to be stretched in good ways. So those are just a few ground rules. I know it's our last time together, but I thought it would be good to revisit those again. I am going to mute everybody because I'm getting feedback. Okay. And then I will pin William. Okay. Okay, so today's guiding question is, what is the church's task? Racial reconciliation or racial justice? And it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but I thought it would be productive for us to kind of consider that question. And we'll be approaching this question through the issue of reparations. And our speaker in conversation tonight should be familiar to many of you. He is the Reverend William Moses Summerville. And so welcome back to the space. He was born and reared in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, as the youngest of three, where his parents, Willie T. and Valerian Alexander Summerville, were public school educators. An ordained Baptist minister, his professional experience began working with military personnel as an Air Force Reserve chaplain and youth minister at a Presbyterian church after seminary. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois, and is currently writing his doctoral dissertation addressing a quantitative comparative study exploring racial reconciliation at Omega Graduate School in Dayton, Tennessee. Currently, he serves as founding pastor of Kingdom Come Community Church and is also a hospice chaplain in South Orange County. And he is running for Congress in California's 42nd district. So welcome.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Sujeen Ko.
Oh, I'm not a reverend, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, resident theologian.
Yeah.
Ko.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
How are you feeling?
Tired.
Yeah. I get that.
But we're making do, and really excited to be in this space. If you find me waving my hand back like this, I have my 7-year-old and my 15-year-old with me while mom is out of town. So really pray for me because God is not finished with me yet. But really excited they are able to witness me. I just remember when I was both of their ages, and my parents, as you shared, were public educators. I'll further share about them. They're both from the segregated South, or they come out of the segregated South. And as public educators, they served outside of the confines of just being teachers. Oftentimes when we laud our relatives or friends or whatnot because they're so great. I say my parents are great because they served outside of the confines of their roles of being parent and educators. They served other children that weren't their students and what have you. And so as I have my sons here watching me work, I just think about how I watched my parents work. So this is very much in my tradition tonight, all the same. So thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
glad you can kind of bring us through this issue tonight. So just so to kind of start from a beginning point, can you explain what reparations are, and maybe what are a couple of reasons to support reparations, and what are some identified arguments that come to mind for why people might be against them?
Okay. I had a whole presentation ready for you too, but
Okay.
we'll go with the question and
Yeah.
answer all the same. So to answer your question, I define there are many definitions of reparations. Let me put that out there. Oftentimes, when we think about reparations, it's often sequestered solely to money and paychecks for a debt, paying paychecks from the U.S. government for a debt that is owed. For those that are often against the case for reparations, the argument would say, I don't want my tax dollars going to welfare dollars. For those who are advocates of reparations, often who are descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, the perspective and posture would be, well, once again, our ancestors built this country and we should have a piece of the wealth for what we have built. And so an operational definition that I highlight or want to lift up in regards to what is reparations, the root word is repair. The purpose of reparations is to repair the damage caused by white supremacy and its negative effects on descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. This can only be achieved, in my summation, through paychecks and policy. And so that's how I would open up with how we define reparations.
Great, thank you. You had said that you had a presentation, so would you feel more comfortable just doing that, or would you, I mean,
Yeah.
are you okay with the?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, whichever works best for you all.
Okay, I mean, I guess I guess when we had discussed this, I had thought we were going to do a Q&A, but I also want to, kind of honor
Yeah,
the work that you
let's do. I'm okay with the Q&A. I'm
Okay,
okay
all
with
right, okay, just wanted to make
I'm
sure.
very much
Okay,
okay. Yeah,
okay,
no.
okay, great, cool.
No. That's did I answer the first question?
Yes, you did, yeah, but
Okay,
so
good.
so so can you share a little bit about I mean, you had kind of mentioned your parents, or alluded to your parents, and you said would mention a little more about them, but can you share your own journey of learning about and advocating for reparations?
Yeah, so going back to, once again, my parents, they educated us in the house. I remember, I don't know if you may have shared this or I did not share this with you. I served as an Air Force Reserve chaplain for 8 years. And what was exciting about that experience was the many young Black men who I came in contact with, mentored, took under my wing, quote unquote, and just, establish relationships with them. And of course, I'm going through the history of the giants within our culture and history, and most specifically Black men, the Paul Robesons, the W.E.B. Du Bois, the Paul Laurence Dunbars, the obviously the Martin Luther King Jr.'s, the Nat Turners, all of these names. And these young men were not aware of many of the names that I just listed forth. And so I'm giving them a hard time about it. And so they took me to task to say, no, Chaplain Summerville, you're supposed to teach us this. You're supposed to tell us our story. And so, in so doing, uh, that's when I shared that experience with a friend of mine, and they told me, they said, if you didn't have the parents you had, you would only be sequestered to Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. And so that's, like I said, where I first learned of reparations. Like I said, through my family. Then it evolved. Into deeply thinking about reparations, because I did not really agree or think that reparations was even needed for African Americans. But
Why did you think that? Can you talk a little more about that?
well, because being a child of good policy, some would suggest privilege, but I would say more policy. Now that where I am now, because I was spoon fed or fed, you work hard, then your hard work will pay off. We had Jim Crow segregation. You have two parents. I was raised in a two-parent home and what have you. And they're saying that, excuse me, one moment.
Okay, sure.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So yeah, they were, from my parents. Where was I? Yeah. So went off to grad school. And going to grad school, that's where I came in contact with the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. While I was there. In that process, in that experience, he was preaching reparations from the pulpit, and it being the will of God, and the fact that God wants to repair the damage caused by the sons and daughters of those enslaved Africans in America. And so that's how I evolved, into it. But like I said, between learning of it, in a young age with my parents, and then before going to grad school, that's where I was not really an advocate for it, because like I said, I was spoon fed or fed the diet of working hard pays off. Now everybody has an opportunity, because racism is not blatant, it's subtle now, and we can overcome the subtleties of racism. What I did not know, and what I further learned, especially now, is that new levels bring new devils. And so so that's where we are. And that's how I evolved into that. Then, and one of the main questions of reparations, especially after the 80s, where there was this big boom in America of immigration happening, and more Africans or Africans of the diaspora were coming into America without experiencing or having family lineage of the experience of both Jim Crow and chattel slavery. So now the question becomes, well, who is entitled to reparations? Once again, as we solely talk about just money and paychecks, and because of that big boom, and it's like, and Black was considered flat at that time. However, there's been a surgence, thanks to Marianne Williamson and her solidarity, that reparations needs to be addressed and taken care of with descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. And so there's a grassroots swell of a reparations movement, most specifically for descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, who would be entitled not only to the paychecks, but to the policy, and be identified as a protected class.
So it seems like the idea of reparations. Oh, sorry, you broke up a little bit. So it seems like the idea of reparations.
I'm right here. I can hear you.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of frozen on my end. Um, Kind of was counter to your ideas about merit, about advancement in US society. Um, and but then you kind of realized that your own context and how that had kind of contributed to to your sort of progress through school, to get an education and things like that. So you mentioned paychecks. Can you kind of talk about what that means? I mean, concretely?
So I'm going to refer to my First Nations brothers and sisters. Um, Obviously, treaties and sovereignties were made with people of First Nations persons within this country. Clearly, they're not all lived up to, and they need to be further affirmed and supported by a U.S. government. One tribe that comes to mind is the tribe that belongs to Pechanga Casino in Temecula. And once you turn 18, you are entitled and you will receive a monthly check for $19,000. And so that's what reparations would look like in paychecks. Now, the goal of reparations with receiving paychecks is to close the racial gap. And most specifically, the lineage racial wealth gap, which is to say and suggest that once the wealth gap is closed, that we are equal in society, which the arguments from scholars like Dr. Sandy Darity out of Duke University, and of course, Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book Caste System, is not in existence, then, maybe then the paychecks can stop. But relates to descendants of U.S. chattel slavery within the racial caste system that we currently live in then the paychecks would need to come, and the grievance is against the United States government.
Oh, hello?
Yeah, I'm right here. Did I
Okay,
break
I'm so
out?
sorry. No, well, I think there's something wrong with my internet. So, but can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear all of us now? Okay, sorry
Eugene,
about
I
that.
think, Eugene, I
Okay.
think it's William's internet
Let me
connection,
check
not
mine too.
yours.
Okay,
Okay. One moment. I think I know why.
okay.
Sujin,
Yes.
his last 5 minutes, we just really lost.
Oh, okay. All right.
At least that's how it felt. So
Did you hear anything about the First Nations?
he
in
said
Temecula?
First Nations Pechanga, but then he had names and it came in and
Okay.
out.
Okay. Can you
All
start
right.
from
Is this better now?
for now? Yeah. Let's go
Okay,
with
good.
it.
No,
So,
I know exactly why. that was my
Okay.
internet. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So I think people heard up to your reference about the casino in Temecula.
So what
Yeah.
is in response to your question of paychecks,
Mhm, mhm.
referring to the Pechanga Casino, which belongs to the tribe of First Nations people, once you turn 18, you will receive a monthly paycheck at $18,000 to $19,000 a month. And so what that looks like, so that's the financial recompense of reparations for First Nations people. That would be something similar to us for descendants, for African American, most specifically descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. However, the goal of paychecks regarding receiving reparations, the goal of it is to close the racial wealth gap. And if the racial wealth gap is not closed, then the paychecks will need to continue to come. What that what that means is that clearly creates more options, more choices, more business opportunities, as well as more protections as a protected class. Now, I mentioned paychecks, but I also say policy, because the purpose of the paychecks is to close the racial wealth gap. But you can close the racial wealth gap. However, that won't get rid of or seek to eradicate racism or racist. So that's why we need the policy as well as the paychecks. And so the purpose of incorporating the policy when we talk about reparations, and I present and coin the term comprehensive reparations, is because we need to address systemic racism within the institutions, within the legal institutions, the education institutions, the economic-based institutions, real estate institutions, religious institutions. I've really been thinking about this stuff, haven't I? Environmental institutions, media institutions, healthcare institutions, and many more, military, international affairs, and the like. So when we talk about reparations, I propose that it's done in a comprehensive capacity with the goals of closing, with paychecks to close the racial wealth gap, and then policies in order to target, to seek to eradicate white supremacy rooted in systemic racism.
Okay. So can you give one concrete example of what such a policy would look like?
Currently, well, there's really a couple. So receiving a paycheck, that's a policy issue, right? But identifying descendants of U.S. chattel slavery as a protected class.
And can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Right. So, for example, as you identified and shared that I work here in South Orange County as a hospice chaplain, okay? And the fact that I worked for an agency here for 5 years without any increase in pay, without any vacation time, without any sick time, and without any opportunity, or not even opportunity, being most qualified for either a raise or a full-time job, because it was per diem. Being a descendant of U.S. chattel slavery and as a protected class descendant of U.S. chattel slavery, there would be much investigation, much support, and much protections around me. But once again, I worked as a hospice chaplain per diem, which is just as needed, for 5 years without an increase in pay, without any vacation time, without earning any benefits, and without any opportunity or even given the opportunity to get full-time work. Also, if my sophisticated fantasy, hence the reason why I'm running for public office, is to further give an identifier of being a protected class, if on our driver's license we had that DOS tag, African American DOS, descendants of slavery, or DOCS, descendants of chattel slavery, which will be a indicator to be it if we wrongly get stopped by the police, they will see that and they will know that there is some legislation and protection around us if police officers want to get out of pocket. Because the motivation of this journey, this race, this journey that we're on throughout, these past 6 months, is basically what happened to the misbehavior of police officer Derek Chauvin against George Floyd. And I wonder if George Floyd had a DOS or DOCS tag as a protected class citizen when he was stopped and held by Derek Chauvin, he would still be alive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely something to ponder. I think the issue or what you've brought to our attention is how the language of equality does not actually serve everyone equally. Um, and
Correct.
so to kind of, the idea of the designation of a protected class brings to our attention the ways that chattel slavery has continued to do its damage through the generations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that being said, I think there could be some push from people who are alive today by saying, well, I was not involved in chattel slavery, nor were my ancestors. Why should I support reparations? And additionally, as Christians, shouldn't we just seek peace and reconciliation?
Yeah. So I have a couple of obviously knee-jerk responses to that.
Yeah, sure.
But one of the things that I would first say, if you don't want to partake in being a part of repairing the damage, one, I have to ask, with that characterization of a mindset, do you think that there was something or there's something wrong with America? Okay. So first I have to raise that question. Then I have to ask, do you even want to be an American? Okay. I would then further ask, if this is coming out of a Christian context, are you okay with Jesus being crucified? Or would you have liked for Jesus not to have been crucified at all? When you identify and talk about peace, is peace the absence of, how can I say it? Let me rephrase it. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is navigating and getting through conflict. Or so are you asking for calm or are you asking for peace? Because we know the peace of God surpasses all understanding, right? And so that's what I would propose to that kind of pushback. Also, I think about the words of Toni Morrison, where she said, one of the many quotes, right? And that is, to be an American means to be white. Everything else is hyphenated. And unfortunately, in our America, as Maya Angelou aptly identifies, these yet to be United States of America, we operate out of a standardization of whiteness rather than a standardization of equity, which you mentioned equality earlier, and that everything and everyone is not equal as we assume, which means, thank you, son, for turning on the light, which means that equality would suggest everyone is the same. But equity for me is everyone is treated fair. Okay. We get equity in society that will then give us some peer into finally attaining the justice, the racial justice and racial reconciliation that seems to be a far off distant concept to very real tangible reality.
Thank you. So I guess as a final question, what do you think the church, or what do you think churches should do to get involved in the work of reparations? And I don't know how many of you read my my email earlier this week or last week, I can't remember. It's all a blur. But I had shared a report from the Task Force on Reparations from the PCUSA, and that was published, I think, 2010. So quite some time ago. And at that time, most people were not for reparations. And so even within a progressive denomination such as ours, reparations is, at least back then, was a contested issue. And I'm kind of curious to know if it's now. But all that being said, how do you think the church or churches should get involved in the work of reparations?
Depends on what church we're talking about.
Okay.
Right? Because you have one demographic of churches that have been about this work ever since its inception and concept. It has significantly evolved to now being very lineage specific.
Are you talking about the Black church overall, or this church, or New Hope, or like which church?
So the church in general, the church universal, right?
Okay.
Right. I.e. James Cone, the God of the oppressed versus the God of the oppressor, right? So then I'm asking, like I said, what church? Because there are churches, like I said, who've been involved with this work from the inception of the concept of reparations, be it that is now has evolved into being lineage reparations, that is, in the conversation being lineage specific. But then for non-descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, what sacrifices are being made, and very real sacrifices. We think about the story of Jesus and Zacchaeus, right? And Jesus told Zacchaeus to come down from the sycamore tree, right? And after an encounter with Jesus, Zacchaeus having an encounter with Jesus, right? He said, I got to go back and repair the damage of those who I had done wrong 4 times over, right? He identified where he needed to sacrifice his privileges because of the benefits he had acquired off of the exploitation in backs as a government official. Go figure. Right? So something as sacrificing as Zacchaeus fund to identifying, what policies, politics, political candidates, here I am, are advocating for these things as in very real, tangible, and responsible ways. Let me be very clear about that. And the goal, obviously, like I said, the goal is that there be reconciliation. That was the goal of King's beloved community. However, reconciliation, I would suggest, has to be 2 ways. And sometimes reconciliation may not be attained as we would like for it to be because of the damage, the deepness of the damage that was caused. And just that there is repair and being acknowledged, and there's redress around it, that's good enough. And except not the kumbaya moment we may think that we want to have. So the harvest is plentiful and the laborers are very few.
Well, thank you for our conversation. I wanted to give the rest of the people here an opportunity to ask you a couple of questions directly. And so I think we have time for 2 questions if people are interested before we go into breakout. Mike.
I think, let's see, without going into the justification for reparations, I think we can all kind of work through that pretty quickly. The form of reparations, I'd be interested to hear Reverend Summerville's take on, let's say, a proposal that tax dollars be invested in education, specifically in inner city underserved neighborhoods, and not just to bring it up to the standards of public education elsewhere, but to make it better. What?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, finish out your question. I want to make sure I heard you correctly.
That's enough. I think you got it.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying what would a proposal look like to infuse tax dollars in seeking to repair damage that white supremacy has caused within our education system? Is that accurate? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, let me work on it a little bit better. In my opinion, and I think in we have some experience in this, giving money to people doesn't often create a better life for them. Someone that hits the lottery can be broke in a few years. So, so paychecks may sound like a good idea and it may make us all feel better. But in my opinion, it would be so much better to repair the past damage and the current damage that's being done right now by fixing the biggest single, in my opinion, biggest single contributor to that damage, which is a rotten education.
Yeah.
Black people in your city don't have a chance because of the education they get or don't get.
Yeah. And I would further suggest Black people in affluent areas don't have a chance. Okay. Let me give caveat to that.
Okay.
Like I said, I work here in South Orange County, right? We used to live here as a family in South Orange County. Because my wife and I identified and see how systemic racism operates within the public education system in affluent South Orange County, we had to leave South Orange County and go to Long Beach in order to have a better cultural, holistic experience to raise our son in a better public education system. So I agree with you that disenfranchised communities, be it Black, white, brown, what have you, are significantly disadvantaged. But also, let's not assume that because there's affluency, right, that would be a better shot, right? Because it goes back to what I identified in the words of Toni Morrison, that we have this standardization of whiteness in American society as the bearer. To your argument around just giving someone paychecks and so forth, I would then have to now raise the question, are we okay with our US government giving Ukraine a now $14 billion in light of the crisis that they are experiencing? To say, you know what, let's not give Ukraine any money or any assistance at all, because it's not going to get better for them. Does that make sense?
I'm having a hard time connecting those two. So, you know,
damage is done to Ukraine.
Right.
Repair is the goal, right? In light of the war-torn damage that's happening in Ukraine. Fair enough?
Not exactly. I think we are providing military hardware and intelligence, et cetera, to help them win a war.
Okay.
That's not
I don't want to get too derailed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I think at least your point stands, William, about the issue of how you know, even being in an affluent school system is not life-giving for Black children as well. So that it presents its own systemic racist challenges of systemic racism.
Right. To answer the question.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Carry on.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Mike. Do you feel like you have a little clarity on that?
A little, but one quick comment. I think
Actually, if you don't, I'm sorry, Mike, just, I want to be able to give another person a chance to answer a question,
okay.
ask a question, and then
And you
maybe,
can chat me a question if you
Right.
want to, because
Yeah.
clearly we're trying to fix 400 years here.
yeah,
Now 403.
it's
So
a,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? We have, wait, I have a raised hand from,
It's
oh,
me,
Bettina.
Sujeen.
Okay, all
It's
right. I
just
was
you
like,
can't see it with
okay,
my
yeah,
background. I'm
yeah.
sorry. I
No,
was
it's
just
okay.
going to ask. So thank you so much, Reverend William. I always appreciate you so much. So I'm wondering, right? You talked about paychecks and policies, right? So what would be your top 3 like policy recommendations to kind of address the structural racism that, you know, continues to perpetuate this, right? So Mike had suggested education, but I know you probably have ideas, right, about how we change hearts and minds, right, through policy as well as kind of doing that paycheck.
Yeah. So I can't change hearts and minds. Policy can't change hearts and minds. Policy can protect and maybe change behavior. And that's what Martin Luther King was getting at as it relates to desegregation to be fully integrated, that we may not be able to change the minds of our white European American sisters and brothers, but we need to be a part of this American experience and experiment because we built this country and we are descendants of slaves, right? So you have that. I alluded to it earlier, which is why I talked about comprehensive reparations.
Yeah.
It has to be holistic in the institutions that I had listed off.
Okay.
Legal institutions, education, economics, real estate, religion, military, media, environment, healthcare, and international affairs. Like it's everything. It's just, which that's where the policy has to be around, just as much as there needs to then be further accountability. After Reconstruction, there was this concept called the Freedmen's Bureau that was started. And that was the accountability system between government and persons who were formerly enslaved to basically navigate how to become a new America. Unfortunately, Andrew Jackson became president. And so, yeah, and unfortunately that was all turned upside down. So, and reparations, let me thank you to your point and your question. You just brought back a memory. Reparations was given to slave owners when emancipation took shape and place. So it's almost as if burden the black and keep the white silent in order to enjoy the white substance, right? So yeah, so like I said, it can't be necessarily one thing, because it's really holistic. But at a base minimum and at a start, we need to identify all descendants of U.S. chattel slavery and identify us as a protected class, because we're not protected. That really is the premium first thing before anything else.
Thank you, William. Okay, everyone, take a deep breath. We have some time for just conversation in smaller groups. So I have 2 questions, and you don't have to answer both. You can choose from the 2. What is one big question you have from the conversation? That's one question. And has your perspective on reparations changed at all from when you started this series or this session today? So I'm going to give you until 8 o'clock to have discussion. I'm going to put you in groups of 3, I think. And then we'll come back and we'll share some of our responses. And I'm having a little trouble again. Okay, breakout. Okay.
Our group is back.
Oh,
Is it-
okay, great.
We're overachievers.
Okay, yeah. Okay, everyone's back, or most people are back. I know it's always too short, so I apologize again.
Excuse
one
me,
thing?
Sujeen.
Yes.
You connected me with my cousin, who I already know.
Oh, I'm
knows me,
sorry. It
and you
was
connected me
random.
with Mike, as we already engaged. So
Okay.
you really like me,
Yes.
clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got to figure out a different way to do the breakout rooms. I just do it so that it's random.
You're
But
fine. I'm
yeah.
giving you a hard time.
No. But so, I mean, I guess some people were stuck with people from their churches. But anyway, this is a time for all of us to engage together.
Yes.
So any kind of good conversation pieces that you would like to share?
As
And you
people are
can-
getting their thoughts together, what I
Go
did
ahead.
not share earlier, reparations is already written into law in California right now. Assembly Bill 3121. We're just now going through the task force right now to navigate the implementation of it. That's all. So just FYI,
Mhm.
this is not a far distant thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, so just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, thank you.
I think
Don't be-
Susan is talking, but she's on mute.
Oh, okay. Yes, go ahead, Susan.
I was wondering what we were going to do next, and I bought this book because I'd heard a lot about it,
Oh, the Sum of Us.
some of us, and I was trying to think of the analogy, and it's right here on the cover. Is it says in the 50s and 60s, white officials would close the local swimming pools to blacks, or have them, they could be in, just a certain days or times or whatever. And what that did is that meant that the white people didn't get it either. And so apparently this book shows a lot of things that when our culture has punished the blacks, we have had a ripple effect, I guess you could say. It's hurt the whole population, not in the same ways, of course. I'm not saying that, but it just made, I think some of these parallels are talking about helping a white person like myself to feel a little bit of the hurt or dissatisfaction
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
deprived.
Yeah. And let's remember, people, we're part of a faith that calls for us to change. Right? We're called to change, and it's okay to change. And change is hard. But God created change, and so we're following through with what God called us to do. Yeah. And it's never too late. I celebrate as a hospice chaplain, but also found it daunting that I'm hearing way too many times. Like I said, I worked as a hospice chaplain in South Orange County, simply because that's where the money is, or what money I could get. And so I'm hearing too much, chaplain, thank you for finally allowing me to live even though I die. So yeah, so change. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead, Mark.
William, can you tell us a little bit about what is in the California bill with regard to reparation? Is it a paycheck approach? Is it a strengthening institution sort of approach? Does it have accompanying policy changes and so forth?
There will be accompanying policy changes, and they're trying to decide how much the paychecks will be going out. And I just proposed before them, before the task force committee, that we probably need to set up National Reparations Bureau or state reparation bureau sites throughout the state, which once again creates more jobs, which once again stimulates more of the economy. Like, it really helps all of us out here, not just descendants of U.S. chattel slavery. And once again, they're navigating it being lineage specific as well. So, but I also want to highlight, so everybody keep this on your radar, but I'm going to be calling for my non-descendant U.S. chattel slavery folk, white folk, Latinx folk, African immigrants, to call in support of comprehensive reparations as well, because we can't make this solely a Black thing. This is an American thing. Okay. You fix racism, we fix America. Let that sink in, right? So yeah. Does that answer some of your question, Mark? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just not very familiar with the legislation and what it's actually calling for.
Yeah. So the call is for two things, and Mike this is answering Mike's question too. One, the goal is to close the racial wealth gap. Okay, that's one and it's twofold. It's not one goal, it's twofold goal. One goal is let's close the racial wealth gap. And two, with policies, let's seek to reverse the negative effects of systemic racism rooted in white supremacy. That's the goal of reparations at the end of the day. Those are the two end goals. And let's remember, America has been in existence less than when America was enslaved, had enslaved persons, right? So this is, like I said, it's going to take a while, but the work is worth it. And like, we could preserve a whole society for it. So yeah. But how the legislation is being further brought out, the bill HR 40, which is a federal bill, the goal of the task force is basically to give the fixings of what's to address, how can I say this? The current bill now, like I said, is in task force committee mode, rather than fully build implementation mode, because it's the development and implementation. Right now, we're in the development stages of what reparations look like. We're not in the implementation of it. So yeah, so that's what's going on. Pastor Chanetta, I see you on here. Once you see offering increase and tithes increase, it's because the checks came. So yeah. I hope that better answered your question, Mark. I'm sorry. Yeah.
One more comment. Nothing came up in your small groups?
Well, and it's in our small group.
Yeah.
And we were three non-Black participants, and we were very much wishing for the insight of other people of color who've participated in this. I know my own view is certainly influenced and changed, and I think there should be reparations. I'm just not sure what a successful administration of those would look like. I hear what William is saying and appreciate these ideas and have no idea. It's not that I have a background, but to decide that. But I've been curious to know if other people, especially people of color, find their own views settled in this matter about what the strategy should be for reparations. I'd love to hear that in the future.
Yeah. The challenge is in the uphill climb, obviously, and I alluded to this earlier. We've just become so comfortable with the standardization of whiteness to say, well, this is just normal, when normal is subjective, right? And so that's the uphill climb. And we have to reimagine, be creative, right? Rethink. Stop. Rethink, how we even exist in our current society. Because if we keep going the way we're going, we all know about the speech that MLK gave about I have a dream, right? But we don't know about the speech where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King shared that we're coming for our check. And we really don't know about the speech that was in his shirt pocket when he was assassinated on the Lorraine Motel, when he said, America's going to hell. So yeah, we have to really even further imagine what that beloved community that King is calling for and asking for.
And I think the fact that our country, we have not even had something like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, either with Indigenous peoples or with the descendants of chattel slavery. I think that's telling. I think that a lot of the American narrative is the white American narration of history is about innocence. And so I think that's something that we all have to wrestle with, and the church has to play a role in that.
Well said.
And that's what God, arguably, yeah, God wants us to heal. Yeah.
Well, I know everyone is tired, but I want to thank you for all being here. This is the last of this series. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be continuing having these conversations, maybe in a different form, I think. And I want you to continue to pray for wisdom with the direction that we'll be taking. But I also, not all of the small group facilitators are here, but I want to thank all of the small group facilitators for leading their groups through the last 6 months, even when it was hard. And I know that, it wasn't always the way that we envisioned it to be, but I thank you and I thank everybody for journeying here together. Thank you to William for being here, even while he's single dadding it, for sharing his insights and experiences.
The women been doing it long before I have. So listen, either put up or shut up for me. So carry on.
But I appreciate you all. And I'm hoping that we will just continue to push each other, not only towards conversations, but also towards transformation and change. So thank you.